Thing going. So we are here for round two of does anybody use that? Um, Last month we initiated this discussion. We didn't get all the way through talking about the various entities people were interested in. So at people's request, we decided we would just have another session like that. So for those of you who are not here for the first round, some quick background. GIST is intended to be pretty small and easily comprehensible, especially when compared with some other upper ontologies that are out there. And over time, it's kind of grown and shrunk, and it's been interesting as I've watched it over the last, oh gosh, 10 years or more, to see it, swell and shrink. So because over time, new entities get added in, things that seem useful, but sometimes they don't prove in the long run to be that useful. So we prune things out. Now that we have an active engagement with the user community represented by the people here, we would like to get your input on this process instead of just us huddling together and deciding what ought to perhaps be taken out. We want to get your feedback. So in today's session, it's not going to be the typical slide-based presentation, the current 2 or 3 aside. What we're really looking for here is an open discussion, questions, just a dialogue among the people who are using GIST or are interested in it. We are going to focus less on the classes to start with, and more on the properties. And the reason for this is generally most of the classes either see use in various client engagements, or they serve as super classes for various classes, where they're there to give you a place to plug in some of your domain specific classes. And consequently, there's less chance that we're going to take something out of the classes. But the properties, on the other hand, are where there really is a lot of scope for taking another look at things and saying, are we really using that? There are these things that seemed like they were going to be useful, but now in retrospect we're going But again, we want to get the broader user community involved because you may be using these things in ways that we're not aware of. So any questions? Or let me just do the approach here real quick. I have highlighted some of the lesser used properties and classes to kick off the discussion. And we can discuss any of these entities that you want to, but we're going to start with the highlighted ones. And in accordance with some suggestions from the prior attendees, we're just going to work through them one at a time instead of skipping around as I had done the last time. So we'll be a little more organized about this approach. I noted that I will have Protege open so that we can discuss these things, and I failed to do that in advance, so I'm calling that up right now in the background. And as we talk through whether or not to keep something around, let's try and also articulate what are the criteria that we're using. Just because something doesn't get used a lot doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worth keeping. So as we raise the idea of pruning something out, let's try and express why we are thinking along those lines. All right, any questions before we dive in? All right. So here are the properties that we currently have in GIST 970. I've color coded some of these. The green highlighted items are used in class restrictions, and therefore they're far less likely to be something we want to cut out. Red highlighted items have been identified already for deprecation. The yellow highlighted items, these are the ones that I think are especially worthy of some discussion of whether or not we really want to keep them around. The purple items were just added in recently as we were introducing our Internet of Things concepts into GIST. So they're probably not in wide use yet, but you know, we need to give them a little bit of time before, you know, we decide to yank them off the stage. So that said, let's not talk about accepts, but let us do talk about just recorded on. And in the background here, I'm getting Protege going. Okay. All right. Any thoughts on just recorded on?
Dan?
Yes.
Can I suggest that for everyone who doesn't memorize all the deep definitions, just quick read the definition so we can have.
And in fact, I'm going to change my presentation. I was doing just the window thing, but I'm going to change this so we can share the Protege screen as well. I think that's just the better way to go. So recorded on is a subproperty of the actual date. And so it's the range on that is a time instant. And the text definition is something that was posted, but not necessarily the date when it occurred. So it must be after the occurred date, although it could be before or after a planned date. So
this is for bitemporal reasoning, when you want to know the difference between when something happened versus when you recorded the fact that it happened.
yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say this is indispensable for accounting purposes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it comes up frequently. I think it's worth keeping.
Okay, very good. So
any naysayers?
Take that off, or yeah. Okay, so keep that one.
You got Protege going yet?
I do. Are you?
Not seeing your screen yet.
Can you see it? Or
no?
There we go. Okay. All right. So next up, we have aspect of. As I said, you know, the green ones are used in class restrictions, so allows. You know, we're going to go ahead and keep here. Aspect of has no domain or range. You know what this aspect is referring to.
Yeah, not able to see anything on the screen, by the way, right now.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
Let me get this. Hold on. Well.
You may want to unshare and reshare.
Yeah. I'm trying to do.
Dan is trying to get himself sorted. I'll just read the definition. What this aspect is referring to.
Okay. Are you able to see the screen now?
Still not.
Nope. I will tell you that this particular property is being used extensively at one of our most recent customers. as a way of attaching properties to catalog items. So we have various measurements and such that are aspects of the of catalog entries.
Okay.
So I think
Are
that would
we-
definitely object to it being removed.
Right.
It's interesting, Boris, that you say that. Is that a project we're working on that I'm forgetting, or is it a different project?
It is a project that I'm working on.
Yeah, okay. Because I was just going to suggest, maybe we could talk afterward perhaps, but I was going to just suggest this is all about, aspects, and aspects are really kind of characteristics of things. And
Right.
I've
Would
used,
you think specified by as a better way of because it's not really I mean, to some extent it's a specification.
yeah, I was just going to say before you said you were actively using it that I've done 4 or 5 different projects related to this idea of using aspects, and I've never had the inclination to use aspect of, so I was going to suggest that we don't need it. So I'm very interested in seeing maybe after this.
So it's interesting because I did not particularly pick this out myself, because the client started using GIST prior to our engagement, and that is the property off of just their reading of GIST. That is the property that they picked out to attach properties to catalog items.
That it was probably not incorrect. We should have a little session just between the two of us afterward, looking at that actual ontology.
Absolutely, I have some examples.
Probably we should keep it in for the minute, given it's being used. That's interesting.
Okay, 2 questions. Number 1, can you see the screen now?
Not yet.
Still not. Oh gosh, Dan. Bad luck.
Maybe someone else should try.
Yeah, and I'm going to just drop off real quick and come back in. In the meantime, though, how about if you start talking about communication address of?
Oh, I just want to mention something about aspect. Aspect is also view.
Say that again. Aspect is also what?
View.
VU. I don't understand what you mean.
In other words, if you have a particular view of something, that is an aspect of it.
Oh, that's a different sense. This means this is referring to aspect as in just aspect, which is like a characteristic.
Gee, if I could see the definitions.
Well, the definitions are. This is one of the things that we need to do is improve the definitions. But you're right. The word in English aspect means what you're suggesting, but that's not the intended meaning here.
Yeah, but this is another one. Yeah, I mean, just to pile on that, the comment is what this aspect is referring to, which is, I'll say embarrassing. Like, I have no idea what that means. So this was one of the first things I killed when I was dealing with GIST, because I was like, there's no way it's unclear what that means. The English, aspect is polysemous. This is just a nightmare property that people are never going to use consistently. And so I got rid of it and figured once I know stuff I need, I'll just create something that does the stuff I want. But yeah, I think this is a good candidate for eliminating, or at least greatly refining, because it's really hard to understand what it's supposed to be.
Here's the idea. Blood pressure is a characteristic of, or maybe rated voltage is a characteristic of a product. And so you could, if you had rated voltage as an aspect, then you could say, what is it an aspect of? It's an aspect of voltage regulators. That's the idea here. But you're right, it is embarrassing, the inadequacy of
that actually does sound to me like a view, because the view you're taking is the functional view of the aspect of the regulator. You're not looking into how it works or what it's made of or any of those things.
Yeah, I read the word aspect as a synonym with characteristic.
Okay.
So
maybe that's
try
not
to
right.
correlate it to the class, right? So we have an aspect as a class,
yes,
which is a subclass of category, which is a category that is allocated, and I'm not even sure, because it says aspect is a very general term for a characteristic of something that is being measured. which is exactly why. And the examples that they give is such as a property, height, or process cycle time or behavior, right? So when my customer was modeling things like catalog items that had height and weight and voltage, they said, well, aspect is the thing that it is, right? Those are the properties, the characteristic that is being modeled. And then they just use the, just the literal verbal match. Well, each one of these things is an aspect of the thing that it is attached to, as opposed to if this is a subclass of category, then perhaps the intended use was saying that an item is categorized by having this aspect.
As a separate related point, I was just looking very carefully at this aspect in GIST, and I've determined that it's incorrect to have it be a subclass of category.
It seems that it's wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would concur with that.
I agree. I would propose deprecating aspect of rather than removing it. Can everybody live with that?
I want to talk to Boris first to see if we can come up with a better workaround.
Right. We'll look at what I guess we'll try. Michael and I will talk, and we'll try to get a kind of a best practice use of how properties such as, if aspect is ambiguous because it's considered, view as opposed to characteristics, we'll look at how it's, and we'll bring a proposal to next time. But we'll take a note as an action item.
Yeah. Boris, I can. Never mind.
Just as a comment about deprecation versus deletion, we do have an upcoming major release, and so far our policy is stated that our stated policy is that we would not have any deprecated terms in a major release, that they would all be deleted at that point. So you need to consider that. I mean, we may have to change the policy, but just needs to be taken into consideration.
I was understanding that the idea with deprecated is you put it in a separate file. It's not loaded by my main.
That's what we do when we're deprecating. However, at a major release, which doesn't require backward semantic compatibility, we then remove, this is our policy, we then remove those.
Yeah, I see.
And,
Okay.
and I might just add that in every web project I've ever worked on for the last 20 years, we've always distinguished between categories and facets. And categories are something that are used to browse, and facets are something that are used to filter.
Interesting.
So we always have both, and we keep them separate.
Hang on, I'm trying to relate what you just said to the conversation about deprecation. Does that relate, or are you shifting the topic?
It's just about the general concept of categories and subcategories.
I see. Yeah.
And aspects and attributes and blah 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 of things, right? Of entities.
So you're saying that aspects is not a subclass of category, or shouldn't be?
I believe it should not be.
I'm not arguing for or against. I'm just saying that we wouldn't use the word aspect. We would use categories and subcategories, and then we would have another branch, a completely different thing called facets, and they might be grouped, different kinds of facets like dimensions and pricing and anything you might want to filter by versus things that you would want to group or browse by.
We're now at the halfway mark. I think we should move on.
Okay. Are you able to see my screen yet?
Yes.
And
Okay.
I see protege.
Yeah.
However,
All right.
it's displaying classes instead of objects.
Right. So yeah.
Properties.
Back to properties. All right. So the next property up for discussion is communication address of, which is also the inverse of has communication address. It just, my general feeling is It's overly specific and not particularly useful, as opposed to just has address.
Mhm.
It seems to me that there's a big difference between the address of a physical location and the way of reaching people, and that we call these two address basically for historical reasons.
Well, both of them are sort of the location where something is. How do you get there? One
Or
of them is
talk to them.
physical and the other one is electronic, but that can be indicated in the
Well, it doesn't
object.
have to be electronic. Consider a PO box. You don't find me if you go to my PO box.
Yeah. You know,
I think the distinction is still salient.
But we have a postal address for that, right?
Yeah, maybe this one should be a super property of postal address and email address.
No, I don't think so. The communication address is meant to be where do you want to? I want you to reach. I want you to reach me at my email address. I don't want you to text me. I don't want you to call me. I don't want you to write me a letter. I want you to email me. That's the communication address. My
But
preference.
that's just a preferred address, right? It's not.
Oh,
I don't
that's
see
true.
communication.
Oh, that's true.
And see, you know, the very fact that this is, we're not clear on what
Good
this
point.
means or what it's useful for. I think it should be left to individual users to come up with the specific property that does whatever this was intended to be, or whatever people think it was doing. I think it should be left to them to create their own. I think this one is
And
particularly useful.
could you move your search box so I can read the definition?
Yes, I could do that.
It's another poor definition. It's about as good as the last one.
Yeah. You know, this one, you know, the inverse gives a little more.
So Boris, didn't you just say it points to a preferred communication address? I don't see that in the definition.
No, I think he was saying what Michael was saying was.
Yeah, I was misspeaking.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Let me just make a comment. I don't disagree with the sentiment that people are expressing, but I just wonder, there's a pattern of properties with different ways you can relate to the same thing. So you can have different relationships to addresses. It can be the address it's communicated. It could be the address of a preferred thing. It could be the addresses. So the idea of having something like this is potentially a good one. But I agree that this is not particularly well categorized, well thought through. Has anybody ever used this? Who's been using this, if at all?
I use this.
You do.
I use it as the super property for the other subproperties, like people were saying. So my telephone has telephone number, has business address, has personal residence, those sorts of things. This is my collector.
As opposed to just has address?
Yeah, because you don't know what kind of address is. There's lots of different kinds of addresses.
There are, but I think there are only two purposes for addresses, and that's what we should sort out. One is a geo property, well, a geo plus convention property that says where something is. You know, where's the Empire State Building? The other is a way of reaching some kind of social entity.
Yeah, I'm a bit torn here. I think
for where it is, I have like sort of containment essentially, right? Like that. Why not just use a geo-contained sort of move for locating a thing?
I guess because
Well,
it's
you know,
conventional.
yeah.
A building can be torn down and replaced by another building with a different number, but the geolocation hasn't changed.
So we do, you know, within the classes, as you can see here, we have you know, some distinct email address, postal address, building address. But within the properties, we are making a distinction between street address and communication address. Now, the question is a post office box a street address or a communication address?
So I think there's also a problem with building address because there are addresses of physical places that are not buildings, such as parking lot, commercial parking lots or things like that. So,
Apartments for that matter.
pardon me?
Apartments.
Well, that's a building.
Well, it's in a building, but if you want to find me,
Yeah.
it's not enough to go to my building.
So it seems like, well, that would be then there's a lot that needs to be unpacked here, but building
Yes.
address isn't the right term.
So-
Nor is building, because building is not properly defined either.
Okay.
That is
So-
true, Rebecca, but it's a little bit separate from our discussion about the
Right.
property.
What I'm going to propose is that, in fact, we need to have an entire separate discussion about address, both the classes and the properties. Perhaps we will, within semantic arts, we'll have a discussion. We'll come back to the broader community with a proposal. But I don't think we're going to resolve that one here in the time allotted.
Hey, Dan, can I throw out one comment related to this, kind of in the context of a possible criteria for deciding? So right now we have two properties that say pointing to this address, this kind of address, or pointing to that kind of address. So assuming that everything else was okay, we have a decision to make. Should we keep those two? Because you could have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 properties pointing to specific types of addresses or addresses of specific purposes. So the question is, do we want to have 1 or 2 of the key ones, or would we want to have 5 or 6? And I would say, even if we can identify 5 or 6, we shouldn't have them all. But then the question becomes, do we even want 1 or 2? Put that out as a general.
Well, the
Question.
fact is, we
Well-
already have these properties. I think it would be bad to get rid of them all, but I would support.
There's only 2 plus the inverses. There's only actually 2.
Which two?
There's communication address of, and there's what's the other one?
Building address.
Building.
Um,
No, that wasn't the property.
Has street address.
Street address, that's right. So there's street address and communication address.
Oh, okay, so we don't have
There's actually only 2
email.
properties.
We don't have email of.
No, we
No, we do not. So that would have been a communication address by the definition.
Okay, that works for me.
So I think we ought to go with the first do no harm principle. So let's leave
good
these
point.
here. But when we go, when we have an address focused discussion, I think that is definitely a consideration. Again, we don't want to bloat things, but we need to be useful enough, specific enough. All right. So any objections to moving on?
Just wanted to point out Rebecca very helpfully linked a existing GIST issue to sort out the semantics of address, properties, and classes. So
Excellent.
if everybody wants to participate in this, please note and come to the issue and leave your comments and suggestions. And I think we will use that to feed our next discussion.
So the communication address for this issue is the GitHub site.
Thank you.
Well, it's the place to address these issues.
Oh dear.
All right.
Very nice, very nice.
All right.
If you can't
Moving
sit on it, it's not a place.
Don't forget to tip your waiters. All right. All right. So next up is described in. It's the inverse of just about. Document the subject matter appeared in.
This is part of a broader question of inverses, Dan, because
Yeah.
about is something that gets used a lot. And we mostly don't include inverses, but for some reason this one stuck around. So the real question is there a good legitimate reason to have this inverse?
Right.
I'm confused. Why don't we have inverses? I mean, you really think they're clutter?
They, well,
Often than not, yes,
we've gone back and forth on this. We've written documents and blog articles about this. Our current position is have them, but only if you have a really good reason to have them.
Yeah.
Because they just add clutter. They make it inconvenient to look at the view we have right now in Protege, which is not a huge reason. But also, if you do inference, you double the number of triples in the thing.
Fair enough.
So there's a
The only
blog
reason I
article.
ask is that sometimes you seem to have an arbitrary choice of which direction you pick.
Right, so if you don't do inferencing, it requires 2 query paths.
Anyway, John, do you know, is that John's voice I'm hearing?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, so do you know where to look up the blog article on this? We have a article on it, then you can
I'm
have
sure
a
I can find it.
see the rationale. But whether it's right or wrong is a different question. You could bring that back to us if you have some different thoughts.
and again, it isn't that within your own namespace you can't create a property that is the inverse of just about. Again, I think this is a largely unused property.
Yeah, I've never. Has anyone out there used this property at all versus, or even a lot? I use about a fair amount of the time, but I've never had the need to go backward.
Okay. I'm going to suggest that we just go ahead and deprecate this one.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that, I think.
Okay.
Yes, Gail.
You know, for probably just make another kind of general criteria, put thought. In this case, a property is many times a property is used primarily in one direction and not the other. So in this case, I would say, ask the question, if you're on a document, how often are you going to say, what's this document about? Like, well, quite a lot of the time. If you're on an arbitrary thing of any sort, how often are you going to ask, what documents is this thing in? And I would say not very often. So getting rid of this property doesn't create a problem by that particular way of looking at things.
I mean, so here's a useless difference in that. One of the things we're doing at my place of work for medical research stuff is like go find papers on tuberculosis or something like that, right? And so the research question is often framed in that way. I'm not saying I'm opposed to deprecating described in. One other thing I dislike about described in is, and this holds for inverse properties in general, like just when the connotation of described in and the connotation of about is a little different, right? Like mentioned in or something like that, I think would be better. But
yeah,
that's a different question, which is an important one. The name of the inverse is very difficult to find good names of inverse properties quite a lot of time.
Yeah. I'm not being too judgy there, right? But inverse in general are hard for inference and naming, and yeah.
Okay. Let's move along. Direct subtask of.
This comes under the same
task. The inverse. Has direct subtask.
We had a whole separate discussion about the direct versus not, and we decided, we looked at each one of these things individually. There's 3 or 4 cases, and decided that this one would be kept in for the time being.
Right. One of the reasons, well, okay, I'm sorry. So you do think this one needs to be kept in?
Well, we had, that was, Rebecca, I think you played heavily into that discussion. Do you remember thinking that subtask is one of the ones we should leave in?
I don't remember. I don't remember how that discussion unfolded.
I had highlighted, multiple, basically all of the
Oh, the direct.
Subtask of has subtask, direct
Oh,
subtask.
so the direct
all
versus
of,
indirect.
all
is
of those, I guess I was raising the question of the utility of.
Okay, that's a better question.
Yeah.
I've never used these. Has anybody else? It'd be like planning, project planning and things like that. I've never used it.
These
Seems
seem
it
like,
could be
you
useful.
know, these seem like they're just part of the direct part of versus.
Oh, actually, it's a good
part of-
point.
But we made a decision on that issue, which was that we would keep all of these and only remove the direct geo-contained one because that's an arbitrary level of granularity. But in this case, we said people, when project planning, are going to impose their own level of granularity. That's the only way it makes sense.
In other words, it's naturally organized as a tree because it's an artificial human thing.
Yes, good way of putting it.
There's two things going on here, and we need to not confuse them. One is, as Dan pointed out, he highlighted everything that had anything to do with subtask. It's quite separate from the direct question. And so if you're going to keep subtask, then Rebecca's comments about direct versus not are legitimate. But Dan's is a bigger question. Do we want subtask at all? And and if I think about that question, my first thought is, well, maybe not, because why not just use has part? If you have something that is a task and it has a part, then it is a subtask. So maybe we don't need any of these properties.
Well, again, we could dispose of them, or we could just move them under has part.
The question becomes, and we have a general policy of don't have a new property if the only difference is it's applying to a different type of a thing. Does it really mean something different?
It's not a new property. It's an old property.
No, I mean, do you have a separate property?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, so my argument would be we don't need a separate property. We could just, if anyone wants to say something is a subtask of something else, just take two tasks and say one is part of the other, and Bob's your uncle.
Agreed.
Now, that might not be correct, but that's my thought. Does anyone disagree?
The one consideration here, I'm not saying I disagree with this, but in the other cases for part and direct part, transitivity is an important distinction. I don't know if you have any transit. I don't like the direct stuff anyway, to be honest, like in any of their permutations. This is not me putting my thumb on the scale, but maybe there's something different about how you think about transitivity for subtasks. So.
Well, that's a good question that you should be addressed. Thank you for raising it. Part is transitive, and so I think if you use the direct pattern, you could get around the question of transitivity. I'd still, if it was a task that was divided up 3 levels of subtasks, I'd still probably want to know I'd still probably want to be able to collect them all together. So I think transitivity in that context would be useful, potentially.
Sorry,
so my vote is good. Pardon?
Are you sure you mean useful as opposed to useless?
I mean,
transitivity, it destroys the tree information.
No, it doesn't. No, but if you keep the has direct part and has part separately, then you don't destroy it.
Yes. In fact, you probably don't need one if you have the other. If you have direct, and then the other one, the transitive one, can be inferred.
Yes, that's the nature of this pattern.
Okay, works for me.
So my proposal then is this: the subtask and direct subtask and subtask can be handled. Can we just get rid of them completely? And if you want to relate tasks that way, use has part and has direct part.
Okay, in that case, it should be explained in the task class.
That's actually not a bad idea. Then you're going to have a whole bunch of things, about 5 or 6 of these properties here, right?
Yeah.
Flush them all.
Well, that's kind of feels good. It's like getting rid of old crappy emails that you didn't want there anyway.
Welcome to Mirology, or rather, welcome to the end of Mirology.
Wow. One fell swoop.
I have a procedural question here. Is this a decision-making meeting, or is this a meeting about making proposals?
I think it is a proposal meeting.
Okay. So actually, everything that's mentioned here should be entered into GIST.
Yeah, we'll create a separate
Sorry,
issue.
entered into entered into GitHub.
Yeah, yeah. Because we're kind of doing things a little bit on the fly here. I would not want to make a dispositive decision without a little deeper analysis. So.
That's the answer I was looking for.
But I would say it's in a stronger position than just somebody thought it up. It's kind of gone through a first round of vetting.
Yeah.
So that's a good point, Rebecca. Thank you.
Yeah.
So,
Reviewed but not approved yet.
so somebody would need.
Oh, wait, hang on, Dan. Has direct subcategory is not to be deprecated.
No.
Oh, sorry. I just looked at the word sub. All right, did I get all the subclasses?
Direct. You mean actually the subtask? Oh, has subtask, which is in green. We're gonna get rid of.
Okay, we'll have to.
Proposals to get rid of that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's used in a class restriction, so we'll have to.
Oh, you'd have to update.
That's something that's going to have a knock-on effect. So, yeah, we're going.
But that wouldn't be that difficult. You can remove that deprecate. Never mind.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next up is from place.
From place. Oh.
This is really complicated. We had a long discussion about this, and there's an open issue here. Because
I don't think we
decided that for example, from place is different.
Oh, and also this is used. I think maybe this is something that it gets used in a thing here. So I think we need to just leave it.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh.
Wrong one. I'll deal with that later. All right. Now here's one that's definitely going to take up some times. Geo-Occupied by and Geo-Occupies. Geo-Occupied by, the definition is what is in the location. It's the inverse of Geo-Occupies, which also has a sub-property of permanent Geo-Occupies. But Geo-Occupies is a thing occupies our region. I think that's supposed to be a region. So some physical identifiable item or physical substance occupies a place. This is one of those, and the reason I was suggesting that these be removed is simply because the usage for the intended usage for these, I believe, is so influenced by an individual context, for one company to another, that they would probably be better creating their own properties where they can clearly define exactly, how they intend these to be used. That was my rationale for that, and in my experience, they don't get used a lot, but I know that there are other clients where it probably does.
What would you say is the prototypical case?
There's one that I thought we had a property just called occupies. Semantic Arts occupies office building.
Let me see.
Relationship between organization and the building, or I occupy my house, so I live there. I don't know. I've used it a few times, but not a lot.
No, so for the to go to the question, looking at these domains, if you wanted to say, a particular kind of crude oil Geo-Occupies,
Yeah,
and
I
then
think the
have a thing
substances,
for a particular oil field.
the substances are probably the most useful because, you want to say this location is occupied by coal, or oil or water.
But
Water
that's not the
essentially.
physical
But
substance.
they also,
It isn't?
physical identifiable item includes buildings and
Yes,
such.
yeah.
And so, it was like, this was a way of saying, that the building occupies, this place. But again, that's not
This is a
particularly-
wheat field. This is a cornfield.
It's not a particularly intuitive property name.
Yeah, that sounds like it's badly named.
So is it meant to imply that this substance or thing occupies the entire area or is just in it? So I'm just wondering whether Michael's example of occupying a house, that would not fit under, that's not like a wheat field occupying these
Right.
acres.
And
So-
if I recall correctly, it was it was the latter, that it does not occupy the whole space.
Right, so how is it different then from geo-contained in?
Because
I think this
that's
is a
relation
use
between
property.
locations.
Oh,
55 Water Street, Manhattan, is occupied by this company,
Right.
that company, the other
so
company.
what about has physical location then?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that's the original intent. Morgan Stanley occupies, blah 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 address and or a particular building.
A lot of
Or
particular buildings.
Right.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
again, we have an ambiguous definition. We
Yeah.
have an unclear usage.
Not
You
a
know,
lot
I
going
think
But that's why I
think-
asked about the prototype.
Yeah, this is why I think these ought to be removed
I think so.
and allow people to craft their own particular properties that are appropriate and unambiguous for their usage.
Yeah, occupies is a terribly ambiguous word, and since the definition doesn't clarify that at all because it just repeats the
Yeah.
word,
Yeah, I
Well,
wouldn't
that's
know
just
how to
crappy
use it.
defining.
pretty useless.
Everything. I mean, we don't throw out everything that has a crappy definition.
No,
Well,
but-
but nobody seems to know.
No, that's true, but we do throw out
Unless we
everything
go to
that has a crappy
Dave,
definition.
We don't know what it's supposed to mean.
It seems to me that there's no good alternative for the substances.
One
That's-
comment about the substance, John. There's a common misunderstanding with gist and the word physical substance. The word physical substance can be either the actual stuff, in other words, a lump of coal in my hand, or the actual coal sitting beneath the earth. But the type coal just is saying there's coal under there. It's different than saying that particular bit of coal.
And has physical location also seems like it could serve in place of,
Yeah, I think so. I don't see any argument for keeping this, and I see lots of arguments for getting rid of it.
Okay, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
There you go. That's a good one. Does anybody have a hankering for this property to be kept here?
Yeah, flush it.
okay.
Well, we got 3 minutes left. Can we do a simple one? Has altitude.
Okay, just real quick, is there anything that somebody was just going, oh my God, I really want to get rid of X? Is there anything going
Well,
on?
actually, Dan, permanently geo-occupied by.
Yeah, that sounds stupid. What is
It's on
permanent?
the right, is on the third column, 2/3 of the way down.
Okay.
What is permanent?
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that
exactly.
existed.
How much? Even mountains wear
A
away.
fire hydrant. I think that means the fire hydrant is sitting there permanently occupying a physical.
That seems to be the case. There are 6 fire hydrants on my block. I doubt they all work.
Right.
It seems if we don't like Geo-Occupied, I think we really don't like that one. It
Yeah.
seems like a more specific version of the thing we just killed.
Okay. Anything anyone else wants to raise quickly?
Altitude was mentioned.
Yeah, I wondered. I've never needed it, but maybe we should keep
Well,
it.
the idea of
That
mine.
one, that one's already been
Mine at
identified for deprecation.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
it's,
The idea of
Oh, I
mine.
see.
The
prejudice.
idea of mines
Okay.
is what I think of.
No.
It may not matter how high your plane is flying, but it matters very much what level of the mine your good stuff is on.
But again, as there's no reason an individual client can't.
Agreed. Watch it.
Okay, so
Yeah, we don't have has latitude or longitude, do we? Or do we? Do we
Oh,
have
those-
has latitude?
Definitely do.
Yeah. All right, very quickly. Again, thank you everyone for participating. Quick show of hands or calling of voices. Would it be worthwhile to do this yet again sometime?
I actually think so. Maybe we should just keep the momentum going.
Yeah.
I agree absolutely.
Okay. I love it because it's easy to prepare for.
That's right.
Thank you all. We are at the top of the hour.
It's also the case that it's easier to delete things than to add them.
They're true, exactly. So,
Which would you rather do, build a house or burn it down?
but, as Rebecca had indicated, there was a link there if you want to go in and comment on some stuff in the GitHub issues.
Where is this link?
If there are actual issues you wish to initiate there, you're welcome to do that as well.
Where is this link?
I think it was in the chat.
No. We have to capture it then because chat's discorded.
Yeah. So let me turn off my screen share. Right. And so thank you all. And
Don't hang up yet. I haven't captured it.
Oh, okay.
Do you have access to the chat, John?
I don't think I do. I don't see any icon for it.
Okay, I'll share.
Oh,
I'll
that's
share the
too
link with everyone on the call.
Up in the top, there's a little like word bubble icon.
Why don't you just send it to the same people you send the invite to?
Yes, I'll do
Okay.
Email. It's a great thing. Leaves a permanent record.
that.
It's distributed.
Yeah. All right. So thank you all very much. And we'll see you again next month.
Yes.
All right.